Invincible Season 3 has finally come to a close in the form of the Conquest Conundrum. And as I've promised numerous times on videos and in the comments section, I will be updating my episodes tier list now that the season has concluded. And conveniently, the same tier list I used for my episodes tier list prior to Season 3 just got updated with all the new episodes, and it kept my original tier list, so win-win. But before we get started with the ranking, I just want to remind you all to hit the like and sub button if you enjoyed my coverage of Invincible Season 3, and if you end up enjoying this video. I have another Invincible related tier list coming out pretty soon probably, as well as a couple other Invincible Season 3 related videos that I think you'll all enjoy. And just as a reminder for everybody, since everybody seems to get really pissy when I do tier lists, if I put something in the lower tiers, that doesn't mean I think it's bad. It just means I like other things more. So I just want to make it very clear. Let's take, for example, You Look Kinda Dead and This Must Come as a Shock. I very much like those episodes. I just like everything that's above them a little bit more. Okay, I'm glad we got that out of the way. But let's stop beating around the bush and get to this goddamn ranking. Starting off, of course, with Season 3, Episode 1, You're Not Laughing Now. I really liked the opening of this season because Mark's training arc, like at the very beginning of the very first episode, was just such a great way to get viewers hooked and remind us of what Mark is up to and show us how much stronger he's become. Also, we get some very nice banter from Rexplode in this episode in the form of him complaining about his favorite finger not working.
Look, I'm trying to give you the finger right now, and I can't.
Oh man, that's your favorite finger.
We also get like a proper introduction to Multi-Paul, those two guys from the future who have really interesting and creative names, and I definitely haven't forgotten them, as well as the whole issue with Doc Seismic kinda just talking to these really overpowered and really strong centipedes and giant bugs. Doc Seismic has really kicked it up a notch since the last time we saw him. And of course, this episode left us on a cliffhanger that led into the Cecil fight in episode 2, which, yeah, I did a whole video on that fight if you want to check that out. In comparison to the other two opening episodes of the other two seasons, I honestly think that this one is probably the best opening episode we've had. Now, don't get me wrong, the other two opening episodes were fantastic and I enjoyed them a whole lot. And once again, this opening episode follows with the trend of setting up a lot of the conflicts, setting up some of the main conflicts, and just generally giving us a view as to what this season is going to be about. But I think the reason I like this episode so much more than the other opening episodes is because the energy is just so much higher, and I don't know, the general just vibe of it is a whole lot more colorful. So I think I'm gonna put this episode right above the Season 2 opening, but I still think I'm Not Going Anywhere and Here Goes Nothing are just generally better and more enjoyable episodes. Moving on to Season 3, Episode 2, A Deal with the Devil. This episode's main point is the conflict and the actual physical conflict between Cecil and Mark, and it is I think it is honestly one of the best conflicts we have ever seen in the show. Not only does this episode sort of start drawing the lines for Mark's arc this season, his arc kind of being the realization that sometimes you have to take life to preserve it, and I mean, there's just really little to say about how fantastic this episode is. And another thing I really like about this episode is that when Mark makes it to Guardians HQ and the Guardians are like, "What the fuck are you doing, Cecil?" The first Guardian to jump to Mark's defense, like actually jump to his defense, is Rexplode, my boy. Rest in peace. But yeah, this episode is really fantastic, and honestly, I think I might put it at the very top of A tier. I think it honestly deserves it. Next up, we have Season 3, Episode 3, You Want a Real Costume, Right? Not only does this episode serve as a way to introduce Mark's black and blue costume, which I absolutely love, by the way, but Mark also faces another ideological challenge, this time from his own brother. And his brother is challenging him on the grounds of, I killed the Maulers, they can never hurt anyone ever again, and Mark's position is that, no, you shouldn't just kill people, even the Maulers. And the struggle between Mark and his brother in this episode is kind of one of the moments of Mark's overarching arc this season. And while that's all well and good, and that's all sort of good stuff, I don't know, this episode just kind of isn't as standout-ish to me as most of the rest of the season. Well, I think this is like a very good episode from a writing standpoint. I don't know. Aside from the conflict with Mark, the rest of the screen time in the episode kind of doesn't feel very, And we also, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we also learned that Angstrom Levy is still alive in this episode. But whilst I like this episode, don't get me wrong, I do like this episode. I think I don't think it's quite the strongest episode in this season, but I still quite like it, and I think I'm gonna be putting it in like, I'm gonna put it in high C. No, I don't know, give me a second. I'm gonna put it at the very bottom of B tier. That feels right. Also, just to throw it out there for anybody who didn't see the last tier list, the origin of Adam Eve, like where it is on the tier list, it doesn't have any relevance to the other episodes of the show in there. That's like where I would rank it on its own. So anything above it or anything below it doesn't have any impact on it. It's like, oh, I don't think the origin of Adam Eve is better than everything that's below it, and I don't think it's worse than everything above it. But next up, we have Season 3, Episode 4, You Were My Hero. First of all, immediate points to this episode because it's not the last episode we see, and then we have a mid-month break again. And also major points because this is the Prison Break episode. We got Alan the Alien, who is the fucking man. We get more Omni-Man, and of course the absolute Chad Battle Beast. Good fights, witty dialogue, characters we love, redemption arc. This is just a good episode, period. This is also the episode where we learn that there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the universe. Pretty important information if you ask me. It's also the last time we see Alan and Nolan for the rest of the season, although we do get to see Battle Beast in his popsicle form. I'm giving this one a very high A. Like, I can't really make two items like identical in terms of being like on par, but A Deal with the Devil and You Were My Hero, these two are pretty much tied for the first place in A tier, if you will. Moving on to Season 3, Episode 5. This was supposed to be easy. The Return of Machine Head, no words, immediate S tier. Okay, well, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but I'm not changing the ranking. Big old dragon fight, Machine Head, JoJo reference. This is just a good episode all round. It's part of an overarching story that's been happening like once per episode per season, as we've seen the whole Titan/Machine Head plotline, but it's also just a very nice self-contained episode. You know, it doesn't really have anything to do with like the plot relating to Cecil or the Viltrumites or anything like that. It's kind of just Mark on his own facing a dilemma that he has faced before. But at the same time, this episode also continues to serve Mark's character arc throughout this season. Just like Cecil and his brother, Titan served as another grounds to challenge Mark's ideology. This time challenging him on the grounds of, oh, you know, I might be a criminal overlord technically speaking, but the city is a lot more clean and a lot less violent because of me. And if you don't help me, or don't even consider helping me, then they're gonna put someone a whole lot worse in charge and a lot more people will die. And it seems like for each time Mark gets challenged as the season progresses, the challenges he faces get more and more morally gray. And if I'm remembering this correctly, I think Mark goes back home to Eve after they've hooked up, and it kind of just doesn't really say anything after what happened, and quite frankly, I don't think I'd have much to say either. Or it might be after the Powerplex fight, I don't remember. But speaking of Powerplex, next up we have Season 3, Episode 6. All I can say is I'm sorry. This episode is phenomenal. When it comes to the quality of the writing, this episode is probably tied with the finale for like the level of like super duper quality in terms of the writing. And don't get me wrong, the fights are cool too. And yes, this is an excuse for me to bring up the fact that Eve gummed up Powerplex, and I will never stop thinking that that's funny. With no other Viltrumites on the planet, aside from Oliver, but he hasn't really been around long enough to count, without any other Viltrumites around Earth to sort of pin the blame on what happened in Chicago, that kind of just leaves Mark. And Scott, Powerplex, lost a lot in Chicago. He lost the only family that ever really mattered to him. And I'm not counting his psycho wife, because God, that lady needs help. Serious, therapeutic help. But Scott blames Mark for everybody who got killed there. And yeah, technically speaking, Mark did have a part to play in not saving lives, but he was defending the planet, and ultimately Mark really didn't do any wrong in Chicago. But merely due to Mark's presence in Chicago during his battle with his father, Powerplex lost people he cared about, and as a result, A, became Powerplex, and B, raided the Chicago ceremony a year later. And Mark questions that if Powerplex had hurt anybody during the ceremony, would that be his fault? I mean, like, maybe if you squint at it a little bit, I guess? But let's just be honest with ourselves, Scott went way too far for his need for vengeance, and he just needs help. I'm probably gonna do some sort of deep dive onto Powerplex as its own video, but I think it's time I should wrap this up and rank this damn episode. This episode is really good. The writing is fantastic. It also feels very focused in terms of the kind of just its plotline in general and the messaging it's trying to deliver feels very, very focused. I almost don't want to put it in S tier because I kind of would end up then putting all 3 of the final episodes in S tier. I'm gonna give this one like an A tier. Yeah, I think I'm gonna give this one an A tier. I think I like these 2 episodes a little bit better, but this one is just still completely fantastic. And now moving on to the penultimate finale, Season 3, Episode 7, What Have I Done? Invincible War. It's here. And yes, you may have guessed it, the next Invincible tier list is going to be about all the alternate versions of Evil Mark, because I really want to do one of those. Angstrom's back, and he's brought an army of all the worst versions of Mark he could find. We also get introduced to some new heroes in this episode, even though some of them aren't named, like Tech Jacket, a fan favorite. And in general, the cinematography and animation quality in this episode is through the roof. For example, that shot where it's sort of like zooming out, but from the alternate marks, and the fire in their eyes stays the same, but the destruction and their costumes and, you know, the mark themselves change. That was such a beautiful shot. I actually made an error in my video about this episode saying that, you know, Mark hadn't killed Angstrom. He did, by every metric, kill Angstrom in their fight in Season 2. You know, Angstrom's survival was completely unknown to Mark, and like I said, I don't know how he survived with his entire head blown open. But by every metric in I Thought You Were Stronger, Mark killed Angstrom. He was under the complete assumption that Angstrom was dead, and he killed him. So when Mark finds out that Angstrom is doing this and kind of pieces it together himself, also points in intelligence for Invincible, but after seeing how much destruction Angstrom and his band of evil Marks had caused, not to mention Eve getting hurt, Mark kind of doesn't hesitate, and he doesn't hold back when fighting Angstrom. Except he's not quite there yet in terms of not hesitating, period. Because, as we all know, at the very end of their fight, when Mark has the opportunity to just snap Angstrom's neck, he doesn't. He hesitates for just a moment. And sure, you could pin that on Oliver for coming in and being like, kill him, Mark, you have to kill him. But ultimately, Mark probably would have hesitated long enough either way. Also, the Angstrom fight was like, it was alright, you know, it wasn't too bad. We had a big old drone swarm. Mark didn't go through any portals, and I guess they didn't really want him to go through any portals because they already did that last season. Also to display how much more precise and how much more precision Mark has with his flying as well. And the fight, you know, it was alright. It wasn't my favorite fight in the entire show, but yeah, it was alright. It was a pretty decent fight. But man, the highlight of this episode is easily the evil alternate versions of Mark. I mean, they're all entertaining in their own way. Some of them just look cool, some of them talk cool, some of them have, really silly costumes. And some of them are a little bit more interesting than they let on or that we get to experience being led on, like some of them just wanting to bring their mom back, or one of them who sort of just misses his best friend William. And I really like that their betrayal of Angstrom was completely unanimous. Maybe not for the same reasons, but them all being done with his bullshit, I love that it was unanimous. Whilst I really, really like this episode as like a standalone episode, honestly, I don't think it quite makes the cut for A tier. I think it'll take the top of B tier because I think it's, for the most part, better than a lot of these episodes, but I just don't think it quite makes the cut for A tier, because I think for one, I wish I'm kind of on the side of Invincible fans who wish that this arc just lasted 2 whole episodes. I think Invincible Wars could have been a much longer and more interesting arc. But it's not like I can complain about the finale, Season 3, Episode 8. I Thought You'd Never Shut Up. This is, without a doubt in my mind, the best finale of Invincible so far. It's for a list of many, many reasons. I could probably list over 1,000 if you gave me a couple hours, maybe even a couple more thousand, but we don't have that long. Conquest is great, Mark is great, Eve is great, Cecil's great. Just, this is a great finale. And that loneliness speech from Conquest, oh my god, I cannot believe that wasn't in the comics. The fact that that wasn't in the comics and the fact that they've added it to the show, man, it just makes him such a more, like, I don't know, almost compelling villain. Like, don't get me wrong, I would never root for this guy in terms of, like, his goals of destroying everything. I would never root for him, ever. He's sadistic, he's creepy, he's violent, and he enjoys licking the blood of his enemies, which is disgusting. But in terms of his personal life, dude's got no friends. He's not even treated like a person. He doesn't even get a real name. And like I said, the show did such a good job with that loneliness speech that when it was sort of zooming out from Conquest's face as he looked kind of like genuinely sad, I thought for a second he was gonna let go of Mark's throat and be like, maybe you can add me on Facebook or something and I won't destroy your planets. Also, poor Oliver kind of just went to the taffy stretcher factory, kind of like in Willy Wonka when the Mike TV gets all stretched out and flat. And the Invincible account posted this. I don't know. For me, honestly, this is probably my favorite episode of Invincible, period. Like, yet. Like, so far, I think this is honestly my favorite episode. And it might seem a little cliche to put the finale in S tier, but I genuinely think that this is the best episode of Invincible I have watched. And, you know, I thought episode 7 of season 1 was that was my standing favorite episode for the longest time. Not even the season 1 and season 2 finales could supersede it in terms of how much I liked season 1, episode 7. But season 3, episode 8, the finale, it's just too good. I've watched it like 10 times since its release. Not to mention, Mark completes his arc by talking to the one person he was probably challenged the most by, his own brother. Said arc, of course, being that coming to the realization that sometimes in order to preserve life, you must also take it. And what I really like about the way Conquest dies is that Mark didn't hesitate for a second. Whereas when he was fighting Angstrom in the previous episode, he hesitated for just a moment too long for Angstrom to get away. So already directly from one huge climactic feeling episode to the actual climax, Mark grew as a character, and I like that. It's a very nice little parallel, and I'm a big sucker for parallels, anti-parallels, and mirrored moments. And speaking of mirrored moments, this episode also had a very similar moment in terms of both framing and what happened to the train scene in season 1. Poor Mark, man. What is it with Viltrumites and like grabbing their kids by the head and ramming them through a bunch of dead, alive people who become dead people the minute they touch them? What is up with that? Either way, this finale is completely fantastic on every single level. My only gripe with it, my only itty-bitty little gripe, is that Rex's funeral felt a little bit cut short. And that is like my only issue. And you know, for me, a big Rexplode person, it's kind of a bigger issue, but I have more problems with season 1, episode 7 than I do with season 3, episode 8. But there you have it, my updated episodes tier list to include every episode of Invincible season 3. I know literally half the season ended up in A tier, with 3 of them being at the top of the A tier, but they're just such good episodes. It's really hard to put any of these lower than C tier or even in C tier because almost every episode of this show is just so good. And yeah, each one of them has their problems, but they can be very easily overlooked. And you know, none of the issues that any of the episodes have sort of take you out of the show, you know, sort of break your immersion in it. It's like, oh, you know, like, that's a thing, but whatever. And the fact that those issues are so tiny is why this show is so fantastic. But either way, if you enjoyed this video, then definitely be sure to hit the like and sub button. Like I said earlier in the video, I'm going to be doing a tier list on all of the evil alternate versions of Mark very, 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 very soon, because I want to stay on the Invincible hype train for as long as it's going. And I have some other non-tier list Invincible related videos coming out pretty soon. I just want to work on them like properly, give them the love that they deserve, you know? And if you really like the way I do things around here and want to show me a little bit of extra support, then definitely consider becoming a channel member. Not only do you directly support me, but you also get a whole bunch of exclusive rewards in the process, and I would just appreciate it a whole bunch. But that is going to do it for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, have a good day, everyone.